No sport is as equipment intensive as auto racing. When the 5,000 parts and pieces that make up a stock car hit the track on race day, its performance is the result of a mysterious alchemy between man and machine. The driver gets the trophy, but a machine carried him to victory. Welcome to Daytona International Speedway for ESPN Ultimate NASCAR The Cars. I'm Jerry Punch. Now we're here to tell the story of the stock car, from its days as a family sedan on a dirt track to today's high-tech, handcrafted missiles. We'll get under the hood with the sport's greatest cars, the factory wars that accelerated their evolution, and the drivers who have ridden them on the outer edges of the rules.
The track fast and the field faster.
I think Ford is really running today.
And they're hooked up, Jim, in a Chrysler Corporation Ram, Plymouth, and a Dodge.
Human beings love to go fast. Go back to the Colosseum. Go back to really ancient cultures. You find exactly the same impulse. People racing the conveyances made available to us by the invention of the wheel is as old as the wheel itself.
Here is the man, Richard Petty. Jeff Gordon goes to the inside.
Number 3, Junior Johnson.
It's a high-performance vehicle. It's finely tuned. It's got flashy lines. It's got flashy paint schemes. I don't know of anything else that looks any sexier than these big old Goodyear tires rolling around on a 3,400-pound vehicle, just kind of purring like a lion getting ready to jump on you.
It's your tool. It's what you use. It's my driver. When I get to the racetrack, that's where I'm going, is to my race car. It doesn't make any difference who you are. You're no better than what that race car is.
It seemed like no matter who I drove for and everything else, I always had a good car. Everywhere I went, I always felt like I was competitive, and I always had a chance of winning the race.
Every time we build a new race car, I look at it and I'm like, wow, check that out. I look at a race car and it looks good and it's got all the latest technology that we have our hands on. Man, that's a cool thing. They're just a bunch of dumb old pieces of metal you took off the tubing rack and cut them, bent them, welded them all together, painted it. And it's not like the thing thinks or anything, although sometimes when you're fighting one, you think it does have a mind of its own.
I think saying that we have relationships with our cars is probably appropriate. We're a little quirky in that way.
There's certain things about certain cars in the stable that have a particular feel that you like, and it's kind of like putting on an old pair of shoes that you've had for years.
Your favorite car is like your favorite sport cousin. You just put that bad boy on, and every time you put it on, you look good, and it feels good, and you're ready to go somewhere.
First one I always think of is the 67 Ford Fairlane that I drove for Allman and Moody. My first 500-mile win, 3 wins out of 4 starts.
One of my favorite race car probably was like a 73 4.5 Dodge. We ran it for 5 years. It was good on a short track or a big track or a road course. It was just a good balanced race car.
I like the evolution of the 87, 88 T-Bird. That was the kind of the pick of my bunch.
I had my doubts that a Monte Carlo was going to make a good race car. Best race car I ever had in my life. Loved driving that Monte Carlo, and we won a lot of championships and a lot of races with that Monte Carlo. My favorite.
Here we go. He's got him on the inside of turn 6. Never could have thought he'd made the pass there, but he did.
The best example of making that car into something living, like a part of his own body, that was Dale Earnhardt's greatness.
He could make it stalk like a panther. He could make it strike like a water moccasin.
Oh, and Earnhardt spins him out. Oh, man.
He could make it move into situations where nobody else would dare go. And he could get it over the edge of control by anybody else's standards and bring it back.
And Earnhardt loses it, goes on the grass, comes back, and Earnhardt still got the lead. Incredible.
We had a car on the 24 team we called Blacker. It was the first 95 Monte Carlo that we ever built.
For whatever reason, the way they built that car just suited my driving style. It just really reacted and always ran well and put us in positions to win and won a lot too.
With 12 victories and 6 poles between 1995 and 1999, Blacker is the most successful car ever built by Hendrick Motorsports.
The car just won Atlanta, won at Darlington, won at Dover, won at Pocono. We put new front clips, rear clips, bodies, and everything on it. It just ran good. We always said it was the seat, Jeff, just like the seat.
I wore my car out talking to him. Come on, baby. Come on, get down in there now. Get down. You talk to him. Every car I got just about had a name.
They had one car named Bertha, for example, Big Bertha, and she was a big old tough old broad, and she'd run Darlington because she's so tough.
Bertha was so special. I won 29 races in that one car, and the car never failed us. We would wreck that car. We would shove it off in the corner and say, well, she's done this time. And then something would come up, we need a car for something. Let's get old Bertha out, and they'd tie a big old hoist to her and stretch her back out and pull on her and push on her and hang some new parts on her, and man, you'd go to the racetrack and that baby would fly. We had a car named Hemorrhoid too, and I won't tell you, that was not a good car.
It's our job to get everything out of anything. And so everything that's on that car, we have got to understand it, and we have overanalyzed. We have spent way too much money trying to find a way to make every part work for us. And so it's become highly sophisticated.
In a NASCAR garage, dozens of crew members swarm over every car, fighting to find a tiny fraction of performance that might make the difference. Laptops are as common as lug nuts. It is the era of the engineers.
Everybody's become a specialist now. You know, using the word mechanic is almost an insult to any of them anymore because, you know, they do certain things. I mean, it literally takes an engineer to figure out all of that.
The shock technology that we run in the Cup Series is probably only duplicated by Formula One, I would say, as far as how technical it really is.
These cars are manufactured right down to the bolts. And if you get a better bolt, then you have an edge on your competitor. It's almost like a lab experiment. These guys are strapped into machines that are just short of rockets.
The home shops of NASCAR teams are massive operations, each one a race car manufacturing plant. The super speedway cars sit next to the intermediate track cars, the short track cars, and the road course cars, each one custom built to meet the conditions of a particular race.
You see 300 or 400 people that are working constantly on building chassis, setting cars up, putting decals on, painting body work, engineering groups that are sitting back studying shock graphs, aerodynamic numbers, to the tune of about, if you want to have a successful operation, $15 to $20 million a year.
We work exceptionally hard to make last week's car feel like crap. That's what we do.
Today's NASCAR race car is a tuned, tweaked, and tested work of art and science. But it didn't begin that way.
We ran their very first race in June of 1949, and it was a strictly stock car. They took the mufflers off. I think they put tape on the headlights, and you had to have a seat belt and a helmet. That was it.
In a racing business dominated by modified moonshine cars after World War II, NASCAR founder Bill France saw a niche to race the same new cars that were rolling out of a reborn Detroit. In the 1950s, stock car meant strictly stock, and what raced was mostly street legal and showroom straight.
They took the hubcaps off, they put a seat belt in it, they put a roll bar right behind the seat, and that's the way we raced it at Daytona in 1956. Just the way it come off the showroom floor.
We'd run the race and didn't have enough cars to fill the field, so France went over to Hertz and got 3 or 4 cars, went to Avis and got 3 or 4 cars and brought them out there. And they just put anybody in them, you know, that wanted to try to drive and put them in there so they'd have a field of cars to start the race.
Starting the race with a true stock car was one thing, finishing it was another.
The majority of the races that we ran back then were run on dirt tracks. The heavy cars sliding through the turns would simply just dig out big holes, and those that could build their car to be able to stand going over those bumps for a couple hundred laps, expected to be there at the end.
As we went with a stock car, first thing done is started breaking wheels. So NASCAR said, well, we can't have this, so they started letting them build the wheels up. Then they broke the lugs that hold the wheel. They put bigger lugs. Then they broke the spindle. Then they started breaking tie rod ends. You know, so over a period of years, the cars went from stock cars to intermediate race cars.
The intermediate stock cars of the 1960s were hybrids of stock parts and high-performance alterations. By late in the decade, the guts of a NASCAR stock car were almost entirely modified for racing. But the cars still carried their distinctive stock body styling, so important to fans and car makers. Then, as asphalt replaced dirt across the circuit, speed soared, and aerodynamics became a crucial difference maker. Through the 1970s, NASCAR teams pushed beyond Detroit to shape custom-made car bodies for racing.
The only thing stock we used on the car was the hood and the roof and the deck lid. We made the fenders, the doors, and everything else. And of course, we had the nose piece and the front bumper and the rear bumper had to be stock.
After more than 3 decades of racing full-size cars, in 1981, NASCAR switched to the smaller mid-size models. The addition of spoilers and air dams altered the silhouette significantly from the street versions upon which they were based.
The biggest changes in the 1980s was the aero package. They went away from the steel bumpered style race cars that we had run basically through the 60s and into the 70s.
The noses get slicker and the cars get sleeker and the cars got smaller. The cars just kept getting smaller because the little cars go faster. And we found that out with Bill Elliott in 1985.
Elliott right now, whoa, he's getting the job done.
Bill had a Thunderbird that was just absolutely, he won 11 races that year on super speedways. Well, we always thought it was the motor. It wasn't the motor, it was the car. And we kind of all finally figured that out after a while, and then we started working making our cars smaller.
All of a sudden, we went from being guys who could just basically slap it together and make the seams line up and tack weld it to where all of a sudden we're fabricators, we're creators, we're artists.
The 90s was a big swing. Everything was revolutionizing and turning into a more aerodynamic looking race car. While all this was happening, NASCAR was trying to hold us back on the underside of the skin and not have us change too much suspension and geometry wise to try to keep that under wraps and keep that under control. But the exterior of the car was changing dramatically.
There were a lot of areas that you could make huge changes to give your particular manufacturer a huge advantage, and that translated into a lot of wins on the racetrack.
To eliminate the controversial advantages between makes caused by body design, NASCAR in 2003 mandated that all cars be identical in key measurements.
Only thing that's different is one gets engraved Ford, one gets engraved Dodge, one gets engraved Chevrolet. Basically what it did was it took all our aero issues and put everybody in the same box.
That box became much tighter in 2007 with the introduction of the so-called Car of Tomorrow. Designed and developed by NASCAR to be safer, less streamlined, and cheaper for race teams to build, it concludes the car's journey from strictly stock to completely custom.
They have stepped in and said, okay, you guys are spending way too much money on aerodynamics, you're spending way too much money on underbody stuff. They're trying to reel it in, and they're trying to make all the cars much more similar than what we have had.
The car tomorrow will change racing. I think in a lot of ways it'll be a throwback to what racing was in maybe the 70s and early 80s, because the aero package is a standard aero package, the chassis is a standard chassis, and the body is more of a standard body than what we're even running now. And I think it will put it back in the hands of the drivers and back in the hands of the teams. So hopefully it will improve the racing that we see on the racetrack.
He's a board man, I was a dog man. I'm smart when I'm proud.
Many of the fans drive the kind of car that their favorite driver races.
You know why I'm Dodge?
Why?
That's my truck back there. 440,000 miles on it.
You know, NASCAR's got a lot of brand loyalty.
Just behind the rivalries between individual drivers in NASCAR is the competition among automakers to push their brands to the front and create customers out of fans.
They want to beat each other. They want to beat each other badly. They want to go to their dealers and say, look what we did. And they want to look at themselves and look what we did. You know, it's a huge part of our sport.
At times, the competition has sparked all-out wars, horsepower arms races, with dramatic on-track battles, behind-the-scenes espionage, and corporate boycotts.
In the early formative years of NASCAR, the automotive industry discovered racing and saw that it was going to be a wonderful way for them to showcase their products. What they also began to rapidly understand is that they could come in and they could take a commanding role in the sport.
Back then, the old saying was, we raced on Sunday and we sold cars on Monday. And it really happened that way.
The first car company to grab the reins in NASCAR was Hudson, a make that no longer exists. Between 1952 and 1954, Hudson Hornets won 66 of 108 Grand National races and captured 3 consecutive championships. By 1955, all the major U.S. automakers were in the game, running the lighter, faster vehicles produced to meet post-war America's growing desire for horsepower and speed.
They're moving smoothly past the main grandstand into the first turn. A mighty parade of power.
But people were also dying in record numbers on the road and at the racetrack. In response to public and government pressure, Detroit's top executives agreed to officially withdraw factory support of racing in the middle of the 1957 season.
The rest of 57 and 58, they wouldn't even talk to you. They were scared to death. You could call up there and boy, you got the cold shoulder. Then 59, they started to dabble back in it.
Well, they was in racing, but they didn't really publicize that they was in.
First to break the pact was General Motors, which ran a clandestine racing operation of backdoor support that lifted Chevys and Pontiacs to the championship for the next 4 years.
I know the results of Pontiac when I first started. They were 7th and 8th in sales. Within 2 years, they were 3rd in sales. Now that's a lot of money.
500 miles for late model stock cars. 1960, 61, and 62, American automobiles, Pontiac, Plymouth, Ford, and other makes.
I only ran for Chevrolet for 2 years, and then Ford announced in the fall of 1962 at Darlington that they were coming back into support 4 teams, and they asked me to be one of those. During their announcement, they said, we know what our competition is doing. They're doing it under the table. We're going to sponsor the teams where the world will know that they're our teams.
Bob, how important is stock car racing to a big automobile company?
Well, I think the answer to that's evident here today, Chris. You see this tremendous crowd of rabid race fans who are here for just one thing: see how these cars perform.
You could talk about a man's wife easier than you could talk about his car. He'd fight you over his car.
That was the heyday of the sport, when Ford versus Chevy versus Chrysler was really up and going. The sport went to another level for the first time, and it was factory backing.
Chrysler launched a stunning strike in 1964 when it opened the season at Daytona with a fire-breathing new motor, the V8 Hemi. A Hemi-powered Richard Petty ran away with the season amidst loud grumblings from the rival car makers.
When Richard fired that Hemi up, you could tell that was one bad piece. And when he hit the racetrack, the first lap was 174 miles an hour.
Richard drops into a corner wide open and turns the fastest lap ever run at Daytona in a stock car.
NASCAR in '65 wouldn't let us run the Hemi engine because Ford threatened to go home, and then through the year they let us come back, and then the next year Ford wanted to go home. It got really ugly between the manufacturers at that time, and I think NASCAR finally just said, time out.
NASCAR tried to level the playing field, and one of the things they would do is from time to time ban certain cars or prohibit certain engines because they wanted to maintain a competitive balance.
I think NASCAR was right. Things were totally getting out of hand as far as the engines were concerned. To keep any kind of parity and close competition out there, France needed to do what he did. Chrysler set out most of '65, and Ford set out a good portion in 1966.
Then in 1967, with the Hemi legal again, Petty set the all-time bar for NASCAR domination, winning 27 of 48 races, including 10 in a row. The rout unleashed a counter-offensive from Ford through its factory-backed race teams.
Back then, it was just war. You know, it was like, we're going to pull something out better, and it was fierce. But everybody wanted to be part of it, and we were all about beating the Petties.
With the buying public in a full-on high-performance craze by the end of the 1960s, Ford and Chrysler took their war to the air. Ford's factory teams ran a Torino fastback with a sculpted droop nose that won 26 of the 54 races in 1969. Chrysler fired back with the most exotic stock cars ever made, the Dodge Charger Daytona and its sister, the Plymouth Superbird. The winged Chryslers took 38 of 48 races in 1970.
It had a sloped nose, and its back end was nice and slick, and it would cut through the air, and there was a huge wing attached to the top of it. This car just screamed fast.
I think it shocked a lot of them. I mean, the Ford guys especially. I think it was a big surprise to them at how fast the cars really were.
The aerodynamic battles of 1969 and 70 were the last great factory wars of the era. By 1972, with the muscle car craze dying due to rising gas prices and environmental concerns, Detroit again drastically dumped its racing programs.
This is when France sort of changed things around, and since they wasn't supporting it anymore, then he decided not to support them. So now you don't hear a word about them promoting a Chevrolet or a Ford or anything. They're promoting all the drivers.
Factory support from GM and Ford eventually returned to NASCAR in the 1980s. Chrysler didn't end its long holdout until 2001.
That car has been solid all day long.
In 2007, Toyota joined the fray, reigniting the factory wars. For the first time, a foreign manufacturer invested major resources in NASCAR.
they come serious. They come with lots of money. They understand engineering. They understand racing.
And anytime somebody comes in and tries to take away something that the Chevrolets, the Fords, and now the Dodge has already had, which is their standing in the sport, there's going to be rivalries and resentments and animosities even build up about that.
Under the heat of intense competition, every element of stock car racing has been melted down and recast time and time again. Out of the creative chaos have flowed uncountable innovations and innovators.
Go, 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 go.
In the formative years, probably the great mechanical genius was a man named Smokey Unick down in Daytona Beach, who was a self-educated engineer, a self-educated physicist, a self-educated petrochemist.
He could seem to get horsepower. his cars always run.
Smokey Unick was the championship crew chief for Herb Thomas in 1951 and 1953.
Say we would work 100 hours on the car, just for instance, in comparison. He'd work 200 hours on that car. He lived at that garage.
The guy was way, way ahead of his time. He understood that aerodynamics and fluid dynamics were pretty much the same and would take a model of his car down to the creek behind his shop and let the water flow over it and watch it.
Some of Unick's innovations migrated from racing to the production line. He designed and built patented spark plugs, radiators, and received credit for inventing power steering. In his Daytona Beach shop, he tinkered with the size and shape of car bodies.
He could take metal and do things with it that other people couldn't do at that time.
In 1967, at the Daytona 500, Smokey shows up with an unsponsored Chevrolet Chevelle. Now they're running against the massively funded Chrysler and Ford factory teams, and they go out and put the car on the pole. And nobody can figure out how a car with no sponsorship, no factory support, and no help can go out and win the pole for the Daytona 500. And it turns out that the car was basically a 7/8 scale model of what a regular Chevelle should be. It was a little shorter, a little narrower, and nobody caught on to that initially.
Unick built another Chevelle for the 1968 Daytona 500. Side by side with a standard racing Chevelle, the hand-sculpted bodywork, which was the future of NASCAR, is evident. But the car was disallowed by NASCAR, and Smokey angrily drove it out of the speedway.
The biggest rule in NASCAR is if you try something new, it better not work, because NASCAR will stamp it out. When they cite violations, they never say a part is illegal. They say it's unapproved. What that means is that it may fit the rules completely, but if we don't like it, you can't use it. That's extremely arbitrary, and Smokey Unick absolutely could not function in that. He was the ultimate maverick.
He probably had more of an impact in where NASCAR is today than any other individual. And the reason was because he was always pushing the outside of the envelope.
So Alan Kulwicki could be in victory lane for the first time in his Winston Cup career.
Alan Kulwicki came south from Wisconsin in 1985 to tackle the high-powered stock cars of the Winston Cup Series. In his first 6 seasons, he had only 2 victories as he waged a fight to race competitively with little or no sponsorship.
He was almost like weird. I mean, he was a quirky kind of guy. And he didn't care what people thought of him. He didn't care about what clothes he wore. He didn't care. He was just here to race. And he was going to do it his way.
He could figure fuel mileage and tire sets and things like that in his head going around the racetrack.
An engineer, had an engineering degree, and he applied that to the race car in the geometry of the cars. I've actually heard stories about Alan that when he would work on his car, he would wait till everybody went home and go out and work on it at night by himself.
There's the checkered flag for Allen. He's the champion for 92.
It all came together in 1992 when Kulwicki emerged as champion. As the first college graduate to win a Winston Cup title, he turned old school NASCAR upside down and launched the current era of engineering dominance.
Tonight, the motorsports world mourns as mystery surrounds the small plane crash that killed Winston Cup champion Alan Kulwicki and 3 others last night in the rain and fog of rural Tennessee.
Tragically, Kulwicki did not defend his title. In April of 1993, he died in a plane crash on the way to a race.
Driver, owner, innovator, expert. There's not been anybody before or since that could accomplish everything that Alan Kulwicki did.
Ray Evernham broke into Winston Cup as Jeff Gordon's crew chief in 1992. Together, they won the championship in 1995, 97, and 98.
I think he just really tried to take what had been successful up to that point of when he came along and then tried to think outside the box and think of ways to do it better.
Wheel straight, foot on the brake, whoa down, here we go.
One of the ways they did it was a unique approach to pit crews. The Wood Brothers team had pioneered pit strategy in the 1960s. Evernham's Rainbow Warriors took it to the next level.
He said, mechanics are pitting these cars. Why do I have to use them? I want to go out and hire a bunch of athletes. Bottom line, when Ray Evernham comes to NASCAR, if you do a 20-second pit stop for 4 tires and gas, you're in great shape. Today, because of Ray Evernham's refinement of the pit stop, if you're over 13-second range on a 4-tire and gas stop, you're in trouble.
In 1997, Evernham presided over the construction of the most radical Cup car in modern NASCAR, a creation called T-Rex.
Everything we did was not really written in the rule book, to gain performance. We moved bars, we angled shocks, we raised floor pan, and those rules weren't in there at that time.
You are riding with the rocket ship right now. Jeff Gordon is making 4th place now. He is really getting around here.
T-Rex was entered in the Winston, NASCAR's all-star race. Gordon drove it through the field at will and launched ripples of panic through the garage.
I put the pedal down just like every lap was qualifying, man. I was like, see you later.
Obviously, things went well, and NASCAR didn't, afterwards, they didn't like things that they saw and said, don't bring that car back anymore.
Innovations that nobody'd seen before. But that's just a guy sitting down with a sheet of paper and saying, here's what everybody's doing, and here's what I'm going to do. He's a leader, not a follower.
On the upper floor of the NASCAR Research and Development Center near Charlotte, locked behind chain link fencing, lies the end of the line for rogue parts and impounded pieces. They are artifacts of a sport where the line between innovating and cheating is so thin that good race teams stand with one foot on either side.
It's NASCAR's job to police the sport, and it's every competitor's duty to take every possible liberty that they can get away with.
Everybody in the sport bends the rule as much as possible, whether you can call it cheating or not. They stretch them as far as they'll stretch.
It's interpretation. I always said I was not a rule breaker. I was a rule maker. We spent hours, days sometimes, trying to figure out, okay, if this is what the rule says, what does it not say?
I didn't call it cheating. I had a better mousetrap than everybody else.
When you come there with the best mousetrap and they take it away from you, that's wrong.
The endless pursuit of performance drives crew chiefs beyond the rule book. In the engine compartment, running oversized motors, using unapproved parts, and finding ways to beat NASCAR's power-robbing restrictor plate were common.
One of the greatest cheating pieces I ever saw was a carburetor plate that had a sliding panel in it that was connected to the driver's cockpit with piano wire. And that became known as Glotzback's Gizmo.
It had a rod that screwed in the back of it. And whenever you come in, you'd unscrew that rod and drop it down in the door. And of course it closed back up, and then when they checked it, it looked legal, but it wasn't.
Because lower means faster, conniving ways were found to hug the track come race time.
My car, when it went through inspection, was where it's supposed to be. But when I went in the first corner, we had pills made of fiber that when that load went on that torsion bar, the car would lay it down.
For many years, NASCAR weighed the cars before the race, but not after, leading teams to load up on heavy metal, which was disposable.
Now, I had a radio that weighed 50 pounds. It's solid state, you know, really old heavy radios. And you'd put that radio in the radio holder on the roll bar right there, and go through tech. And then when you got ready to get the guys to come put you in the car, they'd take it out and put the regular radio in. That's 50 pounds.
I even put lead in a goggle box one time, which it didn't weigh, 5 pounds? They caught me with that. Of course, that's 5 they caught me with, and probably 25 somewhere else.
They would take 300 pounds or so of buckshot and fill it in the frame rails. And on the opening laps of the race, the driver would hit a lever and a door would open up and all these pellets would come running down, and all of a sudden the car would be 300 pounds lighter.
I go in the third turn, all of a sudden it's like I blew out all 4 tires. Spun out and ended up headed straight down pit road. Well, what had happened was that stuff had broken loose and it came out all at once. It just came out under my tires. And I'm going down pit road with dang buckshot going everywhere.
With NASCAR inspectors combing the cars for rules violations, hiding the tricks was as important as creating them.
In the beginning, we used to help the inspectors inspect. Now, can you believe that? We helped the inspectors inspect. That's the same thing as letting the fox in the hen house. We'll collect the eggs for you, don't worry about it.
You know, let's do 10 things and do a couple pretty obvious. Let them catch that, they think they done something, you're getting by with 5 or 6 things.
NASCAR, first of all, they only had a couple of inspectors, and even if they found something and made you take it off, they go to inspect somebody else's car, you put it back on because you figured, okay, my car's already been inspected, it won't come back here. And most of the time they wouldn't.
While many violations slipped away undetected, NASCAR officials have made their share of high-profile busts involving some of the sport's biggest names. In 1976, Darrell Waltrip and A.J. Foyt were thrown off the front row of the Daytona 500 for allegedly using nitrous oxide to qualify. Even the King was not immune from prosecution. Richard Petty was allowed to keep his 198th win in 1983, but was slapped with a hefty fine and points penalty.
Richard Petty's motor was found to be some 24 cubic inches over the limit. And at the end of the race, left side tires all the way around. That's a big no-no.
But Mark Martin paid perhaps the highest price for a NASCAR penalty when his team was charged with using an illegal carburetor spacer at Richmond in 1990. Docked 46 points, he ended the season ranked second behind Dale Earnhardt, 26 points short of the title.
I'm not really sure what kind of impact a championship trophy would really have on my life today. You're talking to a guy who never won a championship.
If you have somebody all of a sudden break out of that box and perform at a level far and above and beyond what his peers are doing, there is an assumption that there is something illegal going on.
Bill Elliott has won the Michigan Champion Spark Plug 400, his 9th win of 1985.
Bill Elliott in 1985 when he won the Winston Million and won so many races. Bill France pulled him into the trailer and said, "Son, you can win all the races you want, but you will not come here and stink up my show. And I'm going to tear your car to the ground after every race to make sure you don't." And so, yeah, definitely NASCAR tries to intimidate people if they win too much.
We ran so well that I think they wanted to look and see what we had. And I'm glad they did, because we were above board and had a clean slate through all that era, and there was a lot of other guys that didn't.
The rule book is there to provide rules and regulations, and guys try to interpret that in different ways to get an advantage. You can say, well, that's cheating. Well, we don't condone cheating.
5 crew chiefs felt NASCAR's heavy hand during qualifying for the 2007 Daytona 500 when they were suspended for violations, demonstrating that the tension between the rule book and competitors looking for an edge is never ending.
It's sad that it used to be the Innovators series. You know, you used to be able to go out there and do something different. And if you were out there and you were successful, everybody was like, man, that's a neat car. You did a really good job of this. And now if you do something along those lines, it's a $25,000 fine and 25 points and a couple weeks suspension.
The age-old question that'll go on forever is what percentage is a driver and what percentage of it is car. And I can tell you in today's world that nobody wins with a bad car. Technology and multi-car teams have made competition so tight that it's hard to overcome a car that won't go fast.
As a driver, you want that car to be a part of you, yes, but you're not going to make that car do something that it's not capable of doing. You can holler and beat on the steering wheel all that you want. That's not going to change the way that it's going to react.
A race car's absolutely got a personality. You know, sometimes you need an exorcist to come in and work on them. Cars definitely have personalities. You can't treat them all the same.
The one common denominator through everybody was their love of the automobile. That's the one common denominator. You can go back to whatever. It doesn't make any difference. Whether they were farmers, whether they worked at a gas station, whether they did this, their love for the sport grew from their love of the car, from the automobile itself. Just working on it, being a part of it, hanging out with it. It's something strange. There's an allure to a car.
I think the main thing is they're just so cool looking. You know, I mean, the bright colors, I mean, low to the ground, really sleek, aerodynamic. I mean, they just look really, really macho and aggressive.
It's like when thunder rolls. You hear that initial crack of the engine firing up with the low rumble and the roar of these stock cars. It does something to your heartbeat. It makes your head turn. It makes you realize that that's an awesome power right there in front of you.
It is this absolute symphony of color and noise and sensation. So brilliantly, beautifully drawn that you cannot help but respond to it.